Welcome back to this evening edition. This is One-on-One. I'm Lucia Arish, and tonight we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Irwin Cotler, a Canadian Member of Parliament, former Minister of Justice, and former Attorney General of Canada. He is an expert on international and human rights law and has previously defended figures including Nelson Mandela and Natan Sharansky. Professor Cotler is a staunch opponent of the Iranian regime's repression of its own people and of its drive to obtain nuclear weapons. He's also written extensively in support and defense of the State of Israel. Mr. Irwin, thank you very, very, very much for coming to our studio. Professor Cotler. It's a great pleasure and a great honor for me. And the first question that I want to ask you, and I want to start with the Syrian civil war. You're one of the most outspoken people about human rights and the situation in Syria just a week before the International Holocaust Day. I cannot not feel that in 10 years we will be saying that what is happening in Syria is actually a Holocaust.
I've been saying and writing perhaps more on Syria, although it may not be that well known, than on almost any other issue in the Middle East and on human rights issues, that, you know, that Syrians have been dying while the international community has been dithering. And really, the international community has been a bystander to now we have more than 140,000 people that have been killed in Syria. And people don't seem to be, at this point, you would think that there would be outrage in the international community. We don't have, and we're approaching the third year of what I regarded as the most peaceful protests that began in Syria 3 years ago.
3 years ago, yeah.
And we still don't have one UN Security Council resolution that has condemned the killings in Syria.
How come, Professor Cotler?
Well, there's been vetoes by Russia and China, and you need to have a unanimous decision in order to have the UN Security Council authorize action and the like. But we haven't even been able to get a condemnation. I mean, it has been, in my view, as I say, outrageous. It is the international community as bystander. And the lack of what I have felt would have been this sense of not only just indignation, but anger and outrage in the international community. So I remember there were those of us who felt in the beginnings of that protest that this was a real peaceful protest. But at the end of April, there was a front page article, April 2011, in The Economist magazine, which said savagery in Syria. Then only 400 were dead. A year later, there were 8,000 dead. Yeah. And again, one could speak about, but the international community was not acting. This doctrine of the responsibility to protect, that we have a responsibility to protect Syrian civilians when you have cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity, mass atrocities, as we've witnessed in Syria. This doctrine has been missing in action.
So it seems that everybody's going and talking a lot in Geneva 2 conference and in Geneva 1. And I wonder, maybe Barack Obama, the President of the United States, Barack Obama, made a mistake when he decided to go and sit down on a table and discuss the matter and not actually acting on the ground.
Well, you know, the action was needed. Those of us who called for action at that time for humanitarian intervention and the like, we're told, I'm talking about in the first year, when there was no jihadists, when there was no sectarian, so we're told, well, if you intervene in Syria, there'll be more killing, there'll be more sectarian civil strife, there'll be more jihadists. In other words, everything that we were told would happen if we intervened happened because we didn't intervene. And now we're in a situation where there are really no good options, because at this point you've got, in terms of the opposition, an opposition that has become radicalized with jihadists there, including al-Qaeda groups, and you've got a government which continues to kill and bomb its citizens. You know, I remember when we had the chemical weapons agreement to remove and destroy Syria's chemical weapons, it was almost as if it gave a green light. Okay, no chemical weapons, but you can continue killing by other means. And so you have the barrel bombs targeting civilian neighborhoods, the number of children that have been killed, and now the devastating, at this point in terms of humanitarian situation. You have in Syria not only the 140,000 that have been killed, but you have, as you well know, more than 2 million who are refugees and some close to 8 million internally displaced. I mean, this is a tragic humanitarian situation.
So, Professor Cotler, what do you think that the world should do? What do you think? Because we're seeing the situation in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya. It seems that there is no solution.
Well, I think that, there's an absence, as I say, of international leadership, moral and political leadership. Some of Obama's involvement has been characterized as leading from behind. Obama on August 25th, 2012 said, and I'm using this as one example, said that if Syria uses chemical weapons, that will be a red line. Well, in the next year, chemical weapons, as been reported, was used, let's say, on more than 20 occasions. So the red line became a kind of pink advisory. Finally, 1 year later, to the day that he had said the use of chemical weapons would be a red line, finally, tragically, 1,400 were killed in one day, and then Barack Obama acted, but that was with a green light for everything else.
So if we're talking about red lines, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talked a lot about the red line of the Iranian regime and the red line about the nuclear weapon. And again, the United States seems to make this line, like you said, pinker. Do you think that what is happening in the United States, what the United States is seeing that the rest of the world is not?
Well, I think that,
or maybe they're not seeing something.
Yeah, I think Barack Obama, to be fair, in terms of the sanctions, had imposed serious sanctions on Iran, wanted to exhaust the diplomatic option, and I felt that the sanctions were working. It did bring, Iran to the bargaining table. The problem seems to be is that once Iran came, then there was a let-up in terms of the diplomatic pressure and sanctions. And now we have to wait and see because, you have this ironical situation where the P5+1 and Iran come to an agreement, but have diametrically opposed interpretations of what the agreement was. The United States said it does not allow Iran to enrich uranium. Iran says we have an inalienable right to enrich uranium. So I'm worried at this point the extent to which the agreement will be both transparent, and there's some side agreements that we don't know about, that it'll be transparent, that it'll be enforceable, that Iran will be held to account, and that, in fact, the nuclear threat can indeed be countermanded, because it's a threat to Israel, it's a threat to the Middle East as a whole. It really is a threat to international peace and security, and it is something that we have to address.
If you're talking about, if we want to, let's say, try to think about the two regimes, and we want to compare between the two regimes, the Ahmadinejad regime and Hassan Rouhani's regime, do you think that there was a change, or it's only the same devil in disguise?
Well, I think that this regime is much more sophisticated in its approach, as was characterized as a much better charm offensive. I mean, Ahmadinejad was really the poster child for the worst of the Iranian regime. But things that go unknown are, and I look at this because to me it suggests there always was massive domestic repression in Iran. While we are understandably preoccupied with the nuclear threat, we cannot marginalize, let alone sanitize, the human rights repression. To give you one example, before Rouhani was elected under Ahmadinejad, Iran had the highest per capita rate of executions in the world. Since Rouhani was elected, the rate of executions has actually gone up, but it has gone unaddressed and unredressed. And in the week when Rouhani came to the UN General Assembly for what was then billed as the charm offensive on the nuclear issue, 30 Iranians were executed, and yet you heard nothing about it. So we still have problems in Iran on the human rights side, whether it be in terms of widespread torture or in terms of political prisoners or in terms of assaults on women or in terms of repression of speech and the like. So I think we need to pay attention because the human rights situation is a kind of barometer as to whether we have a regime that is committed to peace as well as to human rights.
So do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu, let's get back a little bit to Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu saying and emphasizing and maybe shouting all the time about Iran is a good thing?
Well, I think it's important that the alarm about Iran be sounded. I think that perhaps if Netanyahu had not himself raised it, at the General Assembly with the red line metaphor and the like, it might not have served as much as a wake-up call if Israel hadn't done it. So I think it was important to have a wake-up call, but it's much more important that the international community, having been awakened, that it act. And that just as with regard to Syria, and we discussed the human rights violations there, it should be sanctioning Iran both on the nuclear as well as on the human rights situation. For example, when former U.S. President Ronald Reagan negotiated an arms control agreement with the former Soviet Union at the time, he didn't say, okay, we're going to have an arms control agreement, we're going to forget about human rights in the Soviet Union, we're going to forget about political prisoners in the Soviet Union. He said, no, we're going to have one integrative approach. So you had a Helsinki final act, you had a security basket, an economic basket, and a human rights basket. I think the international community is capable of doing more than one thing at one time, and therefore human rights as well as the nuclear and the terror threat and the incitement threat should all be, the fourfold threat should be addressed.
But Israel is right now like taking the flag and saying, in a way or another, the subtext is that we are going to save the world if the world is not going to save itself. And we are going to save the world from Iran. And my question is, can Israel have, or does Israel have the capability of actually military attacking Iran?
Israel had the capability to sound the alarm. Israel had the capability to warn the international community of the danger to international peace and security, as well as the existential threat to Israel. But I think the military option is not something that I've supported. I don't think it has support, certainly amongst the Iranian people, and I don't think it is something that Israel can exercise alone. If the international community were serious, then it would realize that it can, through serious and sustained, and has been said, crippling sanctions, hold Iran to account so that the military option never becomes necessary.
In a case that Israel will attack, do you think that Canada will stand behind Israel?
I think that the Canadian position has been, and it's a position that I share, that while we in Canada have supported strong action against Iran in the sense of economic sanctions, diplomatic pressures, and the like, the Canadian government and broke off relations with Iran in the sense we closed our Canadian embassy in Iran, closed the Iranian embassy in Ottawa, etc., still feels that the diplomatic initiative, the P5+1, deserves a chance, but has also expressed skepticism with respect to the way Iran is approaching it and whether Iran is being properly and effectively held to account.
Stephen, the visit of Prime Minister Stephen Harper, we heard such good words and warm words towards Israel, and it seems that maybe Canada is the last friend that Israel can find out there. And with all these warm words, do you think that maybe Canada understands that maybe Israel is doing something wrong here in the Middle East?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that the Canadian government takes its position with regard to the Middle East as a matter of principle. And there are no politics in terms of Prime Minister Harper and his government. I say this as a member of the opposition. I respect the position they take. I think it's a principled position. I think they don't see this as being in contradiction with the promotion of Mideast peace and the promotion of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. But the position of the Prime Minister, which he articulated when he was here, is that at a time when Israel appears isolated and besieged, and where the blame game always appears to be targeting Israel, so the Prime Minister said, we will not engage in that. A true friend stands by its friends, and a true friend does not allow its friend and ally in the Middle East to be singled out for differential and discriminatory treatment.
Professor Cotler, I wish I had more time with you. Thank you very much for this amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, our viewers, for being with us tonight. We will be here again next week on Sunday at the same time, same place, from the Jaffa Port, Israel. Have a great night.